Welcome to the ICN Curriculum Module on Merger Review. I am Bill Stallings of the United States Department of Justice Antitrust Division. The division co-chairs the ICN Merger Working Group along with the competition authorities of Ireland and Italy. Since 2001, Merger Working Group members and NGAs together have produced useful work product on merger notification and procedures, investigative techniques, and the analytical framework for merger review. This module of the ICN's curriculum project provides an overview of much of that work. During the module, you'll hear about the basic principles of horizontal merger review. The module also provides important practical investigative pointers, including planning an investigation, conducting interviews, and obtaining and analyzing relevant information. The module also includes a helpful demonstration based on a hypothetical merger. It tracks the format used by the working group in its training workshops for case handlers. We hope you find this introduction to merger review useful and encourage you to consult the ICN's website where the full range of the Merger Working Group work product is available. Thank you.
The ICN's curriculum project is divided into two sets of modules. Today's module on mergers is one of the advanced group that focuses on particular kinds of conduct. But we recommend that you first look at some of the foundation modules: competitive effects, market definition, and market power. As global enforcement has moved towards a greater focus on competitive effects, these core concepts, driven by economic analysis, have become more important across the globe. I'll be working on the competitive effects module, and in that one, we'll look at the kinds of conduct that can lead to different types of competitive effects using economic analysis. We'll look at coordinated effects as well as exclusionary effects, and also evaluate efficiencies. All of those, of course, are very relevant to the analysis of mergers. But this module on mergers will not go into as much depth on those particular topics as you might find in the foundation modules. Thank you for listening, and we hope the merger module proves to be of value and interest. Thank you.
When conducting an analysis of a merger, an important part of the process is market definition. Market definition is something that I explained with Adrian Majumdar of RBB Economics in Module 2 of the ICN curriculum project. We explained there that an important part of market definition is to define firstly the relevant product market and secondly the relevant geographical market. I gave examples. For example, when defining the relevant product market, I took as an example a bottle of mineral water. Is a bottle of orange fizzy drink a substitute for mineral water, or a sports drink, or even a bottle of milk? Similarly, when thinking about the geographical market, I asked whether a builder's merchant, faced with higher prices in his country, Arcadia, might he then look for alternative supplies in Valhalla? Might he even be prepared to go so far as Ruritania? When we define the relevant product and the relevant geographical market, we ask ourselves, what is the narrowest market that a hypothetical monopolist would consider to be worth monopolizing? In thinking about this in practice, we apply the so-called SNP test. We take a hypothetical product, for example, widgets, which at the moment costs 100. And we ask ourselves, what would happen in the event of a SNP? That is to say, what would happen if there was a small but significant non-transitory increase in price? In that eventuality, would customers for widgets divert their demand to blodgets, even perhaps to sprockets? And we apply the SNP test in order to identify a market worth monopolizing. In Module 2, I explained the theory of market definition. I explained what is meant by the hypothetical monopolist, and I explained the SNP test, which is used to decide what is the relevant product and the relevant geographic market. However, much more important is how is this done in practice. In Module 2, Adrian Majumdar explains various empirical techniques that can be used in order to identify the relevant market.
Another important tool when assessing competition issues is the concept of market power. and it's particularly important when analyzing mergers. Indeed, in the United States, to just take one example, the leading treatise says that the principal concern with mergers is the creation or the enhancement of market power. To take Ireland as just another example, their guidance states that the objective of merger analysis is the identification of an increase in market power that can be sustained over time. So it's a very important issue when you analyze mergers critically. Now, different jurisdictions define market power in different ways, but the bottom line is that it is the exercise of power over price, or put differently, the ability to price above a competitive level over a period of time. Now, in looking at mergers, obviously what you're going to be interested in is whether the combination either creates or enhances market power. Very important to your work. And if you are not perfectly comfortable with the concept of market power, I strongly encourage you to take a look at Module 4, where we go through in some depth and analyze the concept. I think it will be useful to you.
Throughout this module, we will join a case team during various stages of its investigation of a hypothetical merger. For some background on that merger, let us turn to Joseph Wilson from the Competition Commission of Pakistan.
So in our hypothetical case, here's what we know from the notification. Just Soya, the firm to be acquired, is one of the largest manufacturer of soy foods in the country. Several years ago, Just Soya introduced a refrigerated soy milk product under the brand name Thrive. Thrive was first refrigerated soy milk sold in the dairy case and has since spurred a dramatic increase in the popularity of soy milk. Fantasy Dairy, the acquirer, is the nation's leading processor and distributor of fresh milk and other dairy products, and a leader in the specialty food industry. Fantasy product mix is weighted heavily towards fluid milk. In 2006, Fantasy expanded into the milk alternative category with the acquisition of a regional soya milk producer. The integration of soya milk proved difficult, and due to stagnant sales, Fantasy ended its brand in 2008. About 2 years ago, however, Fantasy introduced its Fantasy brand soya milk. Since then, the Fantasy brand has gained a 15% market share. Let's join the staff of Competition Authority in its initial meeting discussing the proposed acquisition.
We've all had the opportunity to review the merger notification forms and the attached documents, along with a white paper that was submitted by the parties. We've also had an initial meeting with the parties to discuss the transaction. And based on the preliminary information, I'd like to get your initial thoughts on this transaction and the issues that we might have to look at as part of an investigation or a preliminary investigation.
Well, it appears that there is only one product overlap between the parties, and that is soy milk. Soy milk is designed as an alternative to dairy animal milks. It is designed for people who have allergies or lactose intolerance or just prefer to drink soy milk for health reasons. Just Soy's Thrive product appears to have 69% of the soy milk market, and Fantasy Dairy's Fantasoy product has approximately 15% of the market. So this would mean a combined share of 84%. This high level of concentration does indicate that the merged entity may be able to exercise market power unilaterally as a result of this transaction.
In fact, isn't there a board presentation that indicates something to that effect?
There is. There's a board presentation in which Fantasy Dairy states that the combination of Thrive and Fantasoy would allow it more leeway to set market prices.
Pat, from an economic standpoint, what are your thoughts?
So I think the important thing to worry about here, to ask about, is whether there are other products other than soy milk that might constrain the possible exercise of market power on the part of the merged entity. So it might be the case that cow's milk actually constrains the pricing, or it might be the case that other alternative milks, such as the lactose-free milk or rice milk or even coconut milk, might constrain the pricing. So we need to determine what the size of the market is or what the other products in the market is. Even if some of these other alternative milks are in the market, there still might be an issue here as 40%, as the soy milk will be at 40%, and that still might be enough to let them raise price.
So it definitely sounds as if product market is going to be a pretty critical issue that we need to investigate in order to really ultimately determine the transaction's ultimate effect on the market by virtue of finding out what the ultimate market shares are. Are there any other dispositive issues that we need to consider?
I think we need to consider the conditions of entry. Even if we assume a narrower soy milk only market, the possibility of new entry or expansion by existing firms could still deter or counteract any potential anti-competitive harms that may result from the merger. We are aware that there has been some recent entry by some soy milk producers. So I think it will be important to determine how significant that new entry is, and also to determine what impact new entry or expansion could have on this market.
Now, in addition to other soy milk producers, is it possible that large customers, like large grocery stores, might opt to offer their own private label soy milk product that would ultimately compete with these?
Yes, we are hearing that, and that is something else that we will need to determine in our investigation.
Interesting. It also seems as if there could be an issue with regards to geographic market. At this stage, it's not clear whether this is really a national market or it's one that's broken up into smaller, more regional markets. We have had indications from the parties and from their documents that regional distribution is more cost-effective for them. So even though that they sell throughout the country, they still do so almost on a regional basis. At the same time, it seems as if there are some smaller players that do not compete nationally. Ultimately, however, there also seem to be national customers that purchase on a nationwide basis, and so either way, we're going to need to determine the market concentration levels both nationally and within various regions, just to be sure. Pat, are there any other thoughts?
Right. We probably also want to look at efficiency issues. This merger could combine either production facilities or distribution facilities that could lower the cost of producing the soy milk. But we'll need to determine whether these cost reductions could be big enough to outweigh any anti-competitive effects of the merger.
Well, I think that certainly gives us a lot to do and a lot to work on and a lot to consider over the next few weeks. And so why don't we meet back in a few weeks after we've had a little more time to analyze some of this and really consider this more fully, and we will have more consideration then.
Sounds good.
Right. Thanks so much.
Now that we've seen the initial meeting of the case team to review the merger filing, let us now turn to Jaime Barahona from the National Economic Prosecutor's Office of Chile for some more background on planning a merger investigation.
Quantitative and qualitative methodologies are used in order to demonstrate the risk or anti-competitive effects of a merger. According to our experience at the Fiscalía, planning the investigation is very important for us. Experience suggests also that it is important for economists to be organized with respect to the investigation team from the beginning. Economists have to work side by side with lawyers to determine what data is going to be obtained from third parties or the merging parties to assess the merger. The kind and amount of information is very important. Public information in countries like Chile is not thorough enough. It doesn't include enough information so you can do a thorough analysis of the merger. So you have to rely on information that is provided by third parties or experts, but you have to take into account that it could be biased. So an objective analysis of that information is needed. The decision on the anti-competitive effects of a merger, subject to a review, it relies on the soundness of all this information that is being requested. So it's very important to plan what information is going to be requested for the analysis of the merger. Another aspect that is important for the team to work on is the hypothesis with respect to the markets that are being affected by the merger. Also with respect to the hypothesis with respect to the effects of the merger or the remedies that can be applied. It is important to have an hypothesis so the line of work can be structured by the team. Now, with respect to the interests that are involved in the analysis of mergers, the authorities have a point of view that rely on assessing what are the possible effects of the merger and the remedies. And on the other hand, the parties want to rely on the efficiencies that they can prove and also on the synergies of the transaction. All these issues have to be dealt with and have to be balanced when you're analyzing a merger. There are specific aspects of an investigation that are very important to take a good use of your time, to be efficient. One of them is, for example, what we did at the Fiscalía, that we're now recording our depositions. The interviews with the general managers or the persons that are directly involved in the product lines that are being assessed are interviewed, and their depositions are recorded to be more efficient and have more time to conduct other work with respect to the analysis. When planning the investigation, it is important to determine what are the sources of the data. One of the sources are the merging parties. They have a lot of information relying on with respect to sales, quantities, and price series. It is important to obtain all this information from the parties. You have to also realize that it could be biased, so you have to balance it with information and the conclusions of other sources. Also, it's important to obtain information from market participants, from customers, suppliers, etc. All of them have important information that can be assessed for analyzing the merger. Also, it's important to obtain information from sector regulators. They have information that has been provided by the parties because of duties that are legally binding for them to report or inform information that is needed because of these sectorial regulations. Now, other sources include independent research and opinions by experts from academia. This information is very important because it can also be balanced with the points of view of the experts that the parties have. Other types of information can also be relied on when you're analyzing cases that were handled in other jurisdictions and findings from other authorities across the world. It is important to assess their information when making an assessment of a merger control operation. Finally, all this information is needed, and this source of information is needed for a useful quantitative analysis of the merger. So you can provide yourself with elements so you can conclude what are the risks and what are the effects of the merger with respect to the markets involved. Finally, we think at Fiscalía that it's very important that you can rely on the ICN handbook of investigative techniques so you can help out your case handlers in working out and assessing mergers.
The purpose of our meeting today is to discuss an investigational plan in our investigation of the proposed transaction between Fantasy Dairy and Just Soy. And we need to identify the types of information necessary to develop the theories of possible harm that could result from the transaction. In particular, we should focus on the issues of product market, entry, and competitive effects. We should probably start by requesting documents and data from Fantasy Dairy and Just Soy. Does anyone have any thoughts on what should be included in this type of request?
I think it's always useful to get strategic business plans and marketing plans from the parties. It helps us understand how they view this market.
And I think that we would like to get at least market level sales data and price data. At least that stuff is. It's not dispositive, but at least it'll give us some ideas as to whether how the market is moving.
I think at a minimum, we're going to need to talk to various market participants. And so at that point, we need to get lists of competitors or who the companies think are competitors, as well as detailed customer lists, including contact information, so that we can contact these customers and competitors and find out how they view the market and what they think of a transaction like this.
Right. We'd like to get data or sales data or sales reports from grocery stores, right? Since they're the intermediaries, they both have to decide what products go on the shelf and what products don't go on the shelf, and they'll also have a sense of how customers will switch between the products as prices change.
And to the extent that geographic market is an issue, I think we should request from the parties to provide a map of manufacturing and distribution facilities to help us analyze the various geographic market issues.
Agreed. I think once we receive the customer contact lists from the parties, we can then start to interview those customers, as they are the companies that are most likely to be affected by this transaction. During those interviews, we should be able to find out from customers whether they view any other products as legitimate substitutes to soy milk. This will help us understand what the relevant product market should be. Customers are likely to be able to tell us whether or not they would be able to switch to another product in the event of a 5 to 10% price increase in the price of soy milk. Also, I think customers could be very helpful in understanding the competitive dynamic between Fantasy Dairy and Just Soy. They should be able to tell us whether or not these companies are competing aggressively for their business.
In terms of conducting interviews, we should also conduct interviews with the companies that the parties identify as competitors, as well as companies that may be poised to enter the market that are not currently competitors. These interviews will help us to determine the conditions of entry. We should also ask them what assets and capabilities are necessary to enter the market as a viable competitor. In addition, these companies should provide us with documents and sales data that will help us calculate our own market shares and concentration figures, as well as to analyze the current competitive landscape.
Also, I think that we would try to get scanner data from the individual grocery stores. This will give us an idea as to how customers switch between products as the retail prices change. So this will help us decide whether Fanta Soy and Thrive are close competitors, and it'll also let us see if customers switch between, say, soy milks and alternative milks as the relative prices of those products change over time.
Well, we have 90 days to conduct our investigation. Let's divide these initial assignments so that we can complete them in a timely manner. Stephanie, could you please draft a request for information that we can send to the parties and for other soy milk producers?
Yes, no problem.
And Pat, could you please draft a request for the grocery store scanner data, as well as any other data that you would need from the parties in order to analyze the transaction from an economic perspective?
I'm already working on it.
Thank you. And I think we should all begin to schedule interviews with customers and competitors, and we can break those out ourselves. And so, as always, we'll just continue to revise our investigational plan throughout the period. One thing that someone should take care of is contacting other international competition authorities so that we can make sure that if they have concerns, that we can coordinate our activities in any way possible.
I can work on that.
Thank you. Well, thanks again, guys, and let's get to it, and we'll meet back again when we have more information.
We now turn to how to obtain evidence from third parties. Customers can be a very useful source of information, as they have a similar interest in competition as do agencies. Both customers and agencies, of course, favour competitive markets. However, customers may only have limited information. Competitors, on the other hand, generally have good information. But this needs careful analysis, as competitors are likely to favour an anti-competitive merger and to oppose a pro-competitive merger. Let's now look at what information is useful. There are various categories of information. Firstly, there's factual information. For example, the number of units produced. Another category of information is predictions. An example here is, what would customers do if prices after the merger went up by 5 to 10%? A third category of information is analysis. Why do customers choose one product rather than another? And yet another category covers impressions and opinions. Let me give you an example for a customer. That is, whether the merger will or will not cause harm. An example for a competitor would be whether the competitor supports or opposes the merger. Let's now turn to looking at how to obtain the information that you require. Well, there are broadly two ways of doing this. One is through written requests, and the other way is by interview. When we're looking at written requests, it's very important to be careful with the wording. Be precise, focus on facts, but give sufficient time for a response to your request. Interviews can be by the telephone or in person. Here it's useful to use open-ended questions such as who, what, why, when, where, and how. Let me remind you of the ICN Handbook of Investigative Techniques. This handbook has a wealth of information on how to obtain evidence from third parties. We're now going to look at two interviews. One is with a customer and the other is with a competitor.
I'd like to talk to you about Super Grocery's purchases of soy milk products, but mostly in the context of how they purchase their dairy products and non-dairy products in general. Could you describe for me what your purchasing policies are?
Super carries a variety of different dairy products and different brands, including Thrive, Fanasoy, Star Soy, Metasoy, Soy Day. We have national brands as well as regional brands.
And could you describe for me, do you feel like there are certain customers themselves that really prefer soy milk to regular milk, or do customers purchase back and forth between regular milk and soy milk, for example?
I think that the majority of our customers do stick with the classic dairy milk. However, we do have a nice offset that prefer to purchase soy milk, and it's a growing industry. So we're seeing more and more people interested in soy milk products.
Now, you had mentioned that there were national and regional brands. What are the brands that Super Grocery carries on their shelves?
Well, we carry Thrive. We also carry Fantasoy, and Fantasoy has a number of offsets like Just Soy, and we also carry Ambrosia and their dairy products, and we're looking into carrying their soy milk as well.
Now, are certain of these products, are they must-have products or national brands? Which ones are the national brands and the regional brands?
Thrive, and it's also called Just Soy. That's the national brand. Our regional brands are Ambrosia or Star Soy, and those are very popular at the moment.
Oh, very good. So it sounds as if you feel like the regional brands still exert some influence on the national brands.
That's definitely the case.
Do customers differentiate between the soy milk products and the other alternative milk products, like the lactose-free milk products like New Milk?
I think for the most part, people are more interested in soy milk than the new milk products, if they're interested in anything other than traditional dairy milk.
Okay. Have you thought about entering into the soy milk market with a private label product of yourselves?
Yes, Super has been looking into this for about the past year, and we are planning to enter the soy milk industry with a private label product in the fourth quarter of this year. However, we're currently still looking for the product that has the right price as well as the right quality. So we haven't found the right product yet.
But it sounds like this is something that you're planning on doing in the future.
Yes.
Have you thought at all about the effects of the merger and how that will affect your selling of soy milk?
I think that the merger is going to cause...
Now, Mr. Cloden, I understand that Ambrosia recently entered the market for refrigerated soy milk. What I'd like to do is just discuss what assets and capabilities are required to enter this market. Can you please describe Ambrosia's manufacturing capabilities for its soy milk products?
Well, we needed a plant, and we needed some lines where we could bottle the soy milk. So we looked into whether or not we would use one of our existing plants and decided that it would be better to build a plant centrally located in the middle of the country. And we set it up with 5 different lines so that we could produce milk, soy milk that comes in different sized bottles and different flavors.
Okay, thank you. Can you please describe Ambrosia's distribution network for its soy milk products?
Well, we're lucky there because we already have the distribution network that's in place from our parent company, Elysium. So we were able to use the trucks that Elysium uses and the refrigeration warehouses that Elysium has in different parts of the country. The refrigeration plants are an important part of the distribution mechanism.
Interesting. Do you believe that Ambrosia's entry into the soy milk market was made easier given the fact that it could rely on Elysium's existing distribution network rather than having to establish a distribution network from scratch?
Sure.
Okay. How long did it take for Ambrosia to enter the market for soy milk?
Oh, I guess I'd say a grand total of about 20 months. We had to get the technical manufacturing equipment, and some of that was imported. That took about 9 months or so to have imported, and we had to construct the whole facility that we built. That took a while, and advertising and all those other things that go with marketing the product. About 20 months.
Okay. And how much did it cost for Ambrosia to enter the market for soy milk?
Once I did the grand total for that, and I think it was around 60 million. I think it was around 24 million or so for the manufacturing equipment, another 6 million or so for the plant that we built. I think it was, we signed a $6 million agreement with a bottling company to make the plastic bottles. Let's see, another 5 or 6 million administrative costs. And then there was about a $5 million slotting fee. I think that comes up to about 60 million. Maybe I've missed one thing or so, but I'm pretty close to there.
Okay, thank you.
When you were entering, did you feel the need to differentiate your product from the incumbent soy milk products? And if so, how did you do that?
Sure. We wanted to enter the market as a special product, and the main thing that we do that's different is we have a technology that allows us to dry the beans first, and then we rehydrogenate them afterwards, and that results in a much less beany taste in the soy milk. So one of the objections that people have to soy milk is that it leaves a beany taste in their mouth afterwards, and we were trying to reduce that taste.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
As you can see, third parties such as customers and competitors can provide a lot of useful information. But there's another important source of information, and that is information that comes from documents. We'll look at documents next.
Now, what is considered an important document will depend on the case, and for each different aspect of the same case as well. As a rule, contemporaneous evidence such as strategic emails or presentations to the board will generally receive more weight than a document produced after the merger has been announced. Such evidence can also be corroborated during the procedure, for example through minutes of an interview with a key customer regarding substitutability, or third-party evidence on input foreclosure, for example. While reviewing documentary evidence, the documents in question should not necessarily be taken at face value, and there should be no hesitation in asking for clarification of the meaning or substance of anything in the documents. In practice, there is work conducted in case teams with one case manager responsible for the overall management of the case, and depending on the size and complexity of the case, several case handlers, members of the chief economist team, and other support staff as relevant. Review is allocated within the case team with tasks generally subdivided by product and, where relevant, according to the different elements of the case, such as product market definition, competitive assessment, entry, efficiencies, and so on. The languages of the documents need to be kept in mind, of course, and these can influence the task allocation depending on the language resources within the case team. At the same time, the tools used to review the evidence must allow access simultaneously to the entire case team. So examples of this are e-discovery tools, databases where all the evidence is uploaded and available to the whole case team, and a document management system for the filing of documents. Now, as regards the review of economic evidence in particular, the European Commission has issued best practices for the submission of such evidence. These include recommendations regarding the content and presentation of economic or econometric analysis, as well as guidance to respond to Commission requests for quantitative data to ensure that reply is timely and relevant. There is also information on this in the ICN Investigative Techniques Handbook in Chapter 4. Professional secrecy and business secrets should also be kept in mind. Business secrets are confidential information about a company's business activity, the disclosure of which would cause serious harm to that company. For example, this could be information relating to know-how, production secrets, supply sources, and so on. A decision must rely on all relevant information, which of course should be made accessible to the parties throughout the procedure. And efficient management of the case file, therefore, throughout the procedure from the very beginning, is crucial. All in all, therefore, whilst every case is of course different, the efficient management of a case is greatly facilitated by both its proper organisation and planning from the very earliest stage.
Let us now rejoin the case team as it meets to discuss what it has learned from its initial review of the documentary evidence and interviews with market participants, including customers and competitors.
The purpose of this meeting is to take stock in a lot of the evidence and data that we've received as a part of our investigation that we developed in our investigational plan from the last meeting. In particular, what I'd like to do is talk about particularly instructive evidence that we've received so far and explain how that's really instructing our analysis into the proposed transaction between Fantasy Dairy and Just Soy. In particular, for example, I'd like to talk about some of the interviews that we've conducted with customers and competitors. Stephanie, were there any particular interviews that you found to be instructive?
Yes, I thought that the interview with ICN Foods was particularly instructive on understanding the conditions of entry. ICN Foods recently launched a new soy milk product called Ambrosia into the market, and it quickly gained about 7% of the market, so they've had some relative success here. The executives of that company told us that they believe that entry barriers in this market are relatively low and that the market is rapidly growing and is attractive for new entry. That said, they did acknowledge that it was easier for them to launch the Ambrosia product than it would be for most companies because they could take advantage of LICM's existing manufacturing and distribution infrastructure. Other companies would have to develop those from scratch, and that could be very costly and time-consuming. Also, the Ambrosia product was only rolled out in a couple of regions rather than on a national scale. They do hope to roll out the product nationally by sometime next year, but they admitted that their current limited geographic coverage has put them at a disadvantage when bidding against Thrive and Fantasoy for shelf space with national grocery store chains.
Well, I also found an interview that we conducted with a company called New Milk to be very instructive. In particular, New Milk, if you recall, produces a lactose-free milk alternative product. So it's not soy milk, but it still at the same time could potentially have some of the same attributes that an alternative milk product would have. In this case, the producers of new milk really said that they did not view themselves really as a significant competitor to either Fantasy Dairy or to Just Soy. In particular, they found that their customers are purchasing lactose-free milk products for a slightly different reason, even though it's a related reason, a slightly different reason than soy milk products, to the degree that really they found any competition or replacement of sales to really only be marginal. At the same time, they also discussed the difficulties of entry and that they would prefer to enter other alternative milk products other than soy milk, and then to try and enter into the soy milk product, which to me indicates a lack of competition as well. Were there any? What were some of the learnings that you had, either from documents or from data?
So the grocery store interviews were sort of mixed. Like, some of the grocery stores certainly thought that soy milk and other alternatives weren't in the same market. One or two thought that there was some possible competition at the margin. The data, on the other hand, is pretty consistent with soy milk being a separate market. The store-level data indicates lots of switching between soy milk brands as the prices of those brands differed over time, but much less switching between soy milk and other milk alternatives as those relative prices changed. Also, the industry-level data that shows soy milk growing market share and alternative milks losing market share is really more consistent with the idea that soy milk is growing the market, and so they're bringing new customers into the market, and that's why their share is growing. New milk, on the other hand, while losing share, isn't really losing total sales. It's actually gaining a little bit in total sales, and that suggests that customers aren't leaving new milk and going over to soy milk. So these products don't seem to compete very well.
Now, in terms of documents, Stephanie, were there any particularly instructive documents for you?
There were a number of helpful documents. In particular, I found a board presentation that was submitted by Fantasy Dairy. And in that presentation, they discuss how the combination of Fantasoy and Thrive is going to strengthen their position in the market and actually allow them more leeway in setting market pricing. I find that to be very indicative of the merged firm's ability to exercise market power unilaterally as a result of this transaction.
Well, I found the documents, particularly the company's documents, to be particularly instructive as well. One thing that you had asked for as part of your document request from the parties is emails, and I found the emails to provide a contemporaneous view of how these companies view the market, and there was in particular a Fantasy Dairy email that indicated that they view the market themselves quite narrowly, and that they assigned the combined entity, or the merger of Just Soy and Fantasy Dairy, to have a 90% share. At that point, it seems that they do not view alternative substitutes, things that are not soy milk, to be a competitor to soy milk, and I found that to be very instructive. So based on all this, I think that we certainly have reason to continue our investigation and to ask for additional documents, continue to conduct industry interviews with customers and competitors, so that ultimately we can come to a conclusion and make a recommendation to our director. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As the case team discussed, market entry and expansion and efficiencies are important considerations in analyzing the competitive effects of a merger. For more background on these issues, let us turn to Sean Ennis of the Competition Commission of Mauritius.
Entry is often cited as a reason that even if a merger places firms in a situation in which they could profitably raise price, that they would not be able to sustain the price increase. The entry of new firms can take the form of new producers of equivalent products, producers of new but substitute products, or entry by moving products from one geographic area to another. The likelihood of entry should be seriously investigated when there's a potential anti-competitive effect, or prior to large investigations that would be stopped in the presence of likely entry. Entry barriers can be defined in the following way. A cost of producing at some or every rate of output which must be borne by a firm which seeks to enter an industry but is not borne by firms already in the industry. That definition is by George Stigler. There are a number of factors to consider when thinking about the effect of entry on a merger. One of the first ones is whether the potential entrant is committed. Another is how long would effective entry take. Another is what are the cost characteristics of entry. In particular, are there any sunk costs? These are investments that could not be recovered upon a firm exiting that business. Are there economies of scale? If there are economies of scale, what is the minimum efficient scale? And then the final factor to consider is, are there any external investors willing to finance entry? What is the entry test that can be used when you're thinking about mergers? Well, the basic answer is that the entry test would ask whether entry is likely, timely, and would be sufficient to deter or defeat anti-competitive effects of a merger. The entry test is not whether one or more entrants would be able to achieve sufficient presence to equal the business capacity of the smallest firm. Efficiencies can sometimes be an important consideration when evaluating mergers. Merging parties may claim that the merger will result in a more efficient operation of the company afterwards, which would allow them to lower the price of goods to consumers. But efficiency analysis is relatively new and untested, so it's worth learning about some of the approaches that have been advocated. The ultimate goal in efficiency analysis is to incorporate considerations of efficiency into the overall evaluation of a merger. Efficiencies are categorized in several types. There are productive efficiencies, allocative efficiencies, and dynamic efficiencies. Where would efficiencies come from? They would come from economies of scale, economies of scope, reallocation of production, combining hard-to-trade assets, increasing buyer power of companies, and potentially from innovation. How frequently are efficiencies achieved? This is unclear. There have been event studies, accounting studies, and case studies of mergers that have had mixed results in terms of showing the extent to which efficiencies really are achieved. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. So we can't make any broad generalizations on the frequency with which they are achieved. So what we would ask in thinking about mergers is, when should efficiencies actually be considered? And the answer is when the efficiencies are merger-specific, likely to be achieved and not simply speculative, verifiable, timely, and they would impact the relevant standard for evaluating the effects of the merger. What you could have is that the price to consumers would fall even though the margin would increase. And then, under the consumer welfare test, the efficiencies would justify a merger that allowed margins to increase. How can efficiencies be identified? How can they be measured? It's important to identify the efficiencies largely with the parties suggesting what the efficiencies would be. And then the efficiencies can be evaluated one by one. Measurement of efficiencies can be difficult, however. They can often be claimed to be quite large when they're relatively small or uncertain. And so what's important is to find an effective way of evaluating and measuring the efficiencies that would exist. The burden of proof for this evaluation should probably lie with the parties themselves, because they have the best access to the evidence about efficiencies. And moreover, it's difficult to disprove false claims. One of the factors that's considered when thinking about efficiencies is how much would the efficiency be passed through to consumers. What's called consumer pass-through is the extent to which those lower costs are actually given on to the consumers. Knowing the industry-wide pass-through does not tell you what the firm-specific pass-through would be. Firm-specific pass-through can be directly estimated using econometric methods, but then the data needs are somewhat substantial. The important point, though, is that you're not likely to have both high anti-competitive effects and low pass-through rates. If you have a high anti-competitive effect, it's likely that the pass-through of efficiencies would also be high. Now, how do you take efficiencies into account in the overall merger evaluation? You think about what the potential harms would be, and then you think about the reduction in costs that might come about from efficiencies. If the harms would likely outweigh the efficiencies, then the decision procedure would probably be that you would challenge the merger. On the other hand, if the efficiencies outweighed the harms, the merger is likely to benefit consumers overall, so you would not challenge the merger.
In some cases, although not our soy milk case, the parties claim that a merger should be permitted because one of the firms is failing. A failing firm is a firm that is consistently losing market share to such an extent that it is likely to go out of business. In assessing claims of a failing firm defense, competition agencies should determine, first, whether the firm would be forced out of the market in the near future because of financial difficulties if not taken over by another undertaking. Second, whether there would be no serious prospect of reorganizing the business. Third, whether there would be no credible, less anti-competitive alternative outcome than the merger in question. And finally, whether in the absence of a merger, the assets of the failing firm would inevitably exit the market.
Let us now rejoin the case team as it meets with its senior management to discuss what its initial review of the proposed merger between Fantasy Dairy Company and Just Soy has found.
Well, why don't we get started? I'm very interested in hearing from both a legal and economic perspective what you found about this proposal.
Yes, I think firstly we should perhaps provide you with a brief summary of the case and what we found. This transaction involves two producers of soy milk products, specifically Fantasy Dairy and Just Soy. And the issues here were, in terms of product market, what does soy milk compete with? Does it compete with milk products generally or other alternative milk products like lactose-free milk? Or is it really a narrow market? And I think in this case we found that it was a narrow market that really only existed among soy milk producers as opposed to any other types of products.
And what's the basis for that tentative conclusion?
The way that we came to that conclusion was mostly through interviews with customers and competitors, as well as through obtaining various scanner data from the parties and from the various customers. And the customers seemed to feel that there was very little interplay between the alternative products and the soy milk products. And certainly the Bureau of Economics, or certainly our economist, has some opinions on that as well.
Yeah, the store-level data showed price effects between soy milk products. So changes in prices gave you changes in the quantity of different brands sold. But there was very little price effect between soy milk products and alternative milk products.
And is the quantity and the quality of the data such that we're confident in these conclusions?
Yes, the store-level data is seems pretty solid. Also, the macro-level data, the data that gets purchased from outside vendors, is also consistent with the soy milk products basically growing their own separate market and having very little effect at the market level on sales of alternative milk products.
Now, one of the things that I like to see when we're going to go forward with enforcement is a situation where all of the evidence seems to point generally in the same direction from different sources, so that the economic analysis, the views of market participants, and what we've learned from the parties' own documents all suggest the same conclusion. Is that the case here?
There's always going to be a case of mixed information, particularly in terms of different opinions from market participants. What we can indicate is certainly that the documents have indicated that these products compete only amongst themselves. One email in particular describes the market share as being 90% and describes the company's products really within their own market. At the same time, the other documents indicate competitive effects where these are particularly close competitors. At the same time, we've also discussed entry with the various competitors in order to determine what they feel. And that's where I think some of the evidence is slightly mixed, but nonetheless definitely indicates that entry barriers are high in this area.
And is that consistent broadly with the economic analysis as well?
Yes. There seem to be scale economies needed in distribution and production. It seems to be much easier for instance, a dairy that's already producing high shelf life dairy products to convert over to the production of soy milk. If they have a national distribution system already in place, then the soy milk can free ride on or piggyback on that existing system. It seems like de novo entry is much more difficult for a number of reasons.
And Stephanie actually has some points on entry as well that she prepared, I believe.
Well, just to follow up on what Mike and Bob have already said about entry, there does seem to be some mixed evidence there. We have heard that this is a rapidly growing market that should be attractive for new entry. And we are aware of some recent new entry into this market, in particular the Ambrosia product that entered and had some success in the market. We've also heard rumors that there are some large food producers that may be interested in entering the soy milk market, but we've been unable to substantiate those rumors. So I don't know how much credibility we give to those at this time. The new entrant into the market, Ambrosia, was uniquely positioned, and they were able to take advantage of some manufacturing and distribution infrastructure that I think other new entrants would not have access to. And so that's one way to kind of distinguish their story from the other stories that we've heard from other competitors and customers in the market. What we've heard consistently is that the smaller fringe players in this market, such as Metasoy and Star Soy, they are not viewed as significant competitors and that they have limited ability to expand.
Well, assuming that there's going to be some entry, do we have any sense as to whether it will be of a scope that's sufficient to ameliorate potentially any competitive effects here?
I think there's 2 points. And firstly is that, no, it would not be sufficient to defeat competitive effects from what would create a almost 90% share by the merged entity. And I think an example of that would be where some of the customers have indicated that they could enter or even potentially planning on entering with private label products. And while that arguably is entry, at the same time, much of the discussions about various entry barriers include the fact that first to market is important and branding is important. And these are things that private label traditionally can't offer. And so as this product is expanding and becoming new to the customers, at the same time, private label is insufficiently positioned to capitalize on these new customers.
Okay, there's 2 other topics I think we need to make sure we touch on. The first is whether there are any plausible claims of efficiencies that we should be taking into account. And then secondly, assuming that it looks as though this may be headed for enforcement, is there a remedy that has been considered that we believe could solve this problem?
So the efficiencies documents definitely indicate that there will be cost savings by combining these 2 firms. But there are no documents that suggest that there will be any benefits to customers. While they mention cost savings, there are no indications from the documents that they would use these cost savings to lower price, to expand the market, to produce new products. So much of the savings are administrative, which typically don't lower marginal costs. There are some savings in distribution by combining distribution networks, but again, there's no suggestion here that this would allow them to lower their prices to stores, to enter into new stores, or in any other way expand their output.
And remedies?
Remedies, there has been a proposed remedy, and as part of that remedy, Fantasoy assets would be divested to an independent purchaser. It would include all assets solely or predominantly related to the Fantasoy business, including the production plant, raw materials, final products, and dedicated distribution vehicles. It also includes assignment of various Fantasoy retail and wholesale contracts. That said, that there are some particulars to this that do have some concerns, and I believe Stephanie has some points regarding that.
Well, the first point is the divestiture would include some royalty payments, and the FTC has consistently had concerns about royalty payments being involved in divestitures because of the ongoing entanglements that it creates, and also the incentives to price anti-competitively and share information between competitors. So here you have the licensing of patents and trademarks and the production formula, and that's tied back to a 5% annual royalty fee. So I think we would need to get some more information about that and possibly work that out so that we didn't have concerns about it. Also, there are some interim agreements, an interim capacity agreement and an interim transport agreement that we have some concerns about. They would be in place for 18 months, but the question is what would happen at the end of that 18 months, and would the divestee be in a position to take over those functions without having those interim agreements? It's just very unclear at this time. Finally, the parties have argued that they don't believe that an upfront buyer is necessary in this situation because there have been several expressions of interest from numerous parties. Star Soy, which is the fourth largest player in this market, has expressed an interest in acquiring these assets. And we have also heard that there are numerous dairy milk producers that are interested in getting into the soy milk market. And so they have also had some expressions of interest from those companies. But given the fact that this is not a standalone business, as evidenced by these interim agreements and the royalty payments, and it's not even clear that a full production plant would be divested here, I think that we'd be very uncomfortable not having an upfront buyer in order to move forward. So I think our bottom line position on this is, Fantasy Dairy has certainly made a serious divestiture proposal that requires some consideration, but there are still some issues we would need to resolve before we'd be comfortable moving forward with it. But I think it's possible that we could get there.
Okay. Well, my sense, based on what I've heard, is that there's a fairly strong basis for moving forward with a challenge to this transaction. Before we make a final decision about that, it seems to me we should continue to vet the potential remedies so that we can get comfortable with whether or not they would be sufficient to replicate the competition that appears otherwise will be lost. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This concludes the ICN Curriculum Project's overview of merger review. We hope you found the content and format useful. If you would like to learn more about the Merger Working Group's existing work product, including recommended practices on merger notification procedures and on merger analysis, we encourage you to visit the Working Group section on the ICN website. If you would like to become more involved in the Merger Working Group, including its training-style workshops for case handlers, please contact the Merger Working Group chairs. Thank you.